Kristi and Tanqueray on the Rocks, the Trailblazers Toolkit.
On this podcast, we dive into the messy realities of corporate life that nobody talks about over office coffee.
Grab your cocktails and join us as we get real about work, life, and everything in between. Cheers.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exhilarating and thrilling episode of Kristi and Tanqueray on the Rocks. Now, listen up. As we were preparing for today's episode, I realized something. Honestly, we haven't talked about Unicorn Leader nearly enough, and I know that I'm not alone in that. But how many of us sit around and we don't talk about the things that we work hard at and that we accomplish? Because it's awkward, and we really don't want to toss our hard work out there. But today, we're going to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about that book, as well as several others that have shaped us. And then we are also going to talk about shows, podcasts, favorite quotes, have a rapid fire question round with Tank and I, and we're going to have all things leadership conversation today. The hope naturally is that everybody feels super excited and they're feeling really ready for next year and inspired by words that guide and challenge us. So let's talk about giving ourselves credit for the work we've done and owning our accomplishments unapologetically. So before we get started, Tanqueray, let's introduce your very first book that is your favorite, one of your three favorites, I guess, leadership books.
Yeah. So it's a non-traditional book, and I actually brought it with me. It is The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And it is, in essence, been a Bible, if you will, for me. I read it multiple times a year, and it is distilled down into four tactical things that everyone could incorporate in leadership and personal. But it is this, right? Number one, be impeccable with your word.
Mhm.
So speak with integrity. Say only what you mean, right? Number two, don't take anything personally. So just, it's right. What others do or what they say is not a projection of something that's happening with you. It's their own reality. It's what they're experiencing. So don't take it personally. And three, don't make assumptions. So ask questions, be curious, communicate like clearly to avoid any misunderstanding with your team, with your spouse, with your friend. Like communicate clearly. Don't make assumptions. And then last but not least, always do your best. So under any circumstance, simply do your best and you will avoid self-judgment and self-abuse and regret. So I love that book. It's again, um, a non-traditional leadership book, but I would strongly, strongly recommend.
I mean, this is so fascinating to me because that's actually a book that I have not ever read. I've heard about it a lot. I've heard many leaders mention it, the four agreements. But what I love, well, firstly, and great job distilling those four things really powerfully. Absolutely agree with every single one of those. I don't think that I've ever met somebody that I would define as a unicorn leader or just an exceptional leader, right? Who hasn't led with those tenets, and probably something that we'll see as a recurring theme amongst the six books that we talk about today is that there's an element of all of that in each one. So I think that's probably something that our listeners would keep an eye out for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
So tell us about your book. I would love like what leadership book. So we only had three, right? As a reminder
Yes.
to our listeners, we
Yes.
three books each, and it was hard. It was hard for me. So what is your first book that you would like to highlight with our listeners?
Well, my first book I want to highlight is actually a lesser known book by Brene Brown, which is The Power of Vulnerability. Now, most people know Brene Brown's book coming out with Dare to Lead. That's a book that I've
Mhm.
introduced at every organization I've ever been to and usually led a book club around it. That was our first book. But I will say the most impactful book and the one that probably led to the largest shift in me as a person, both personally and professionally, was The Power of Vulnerability. So it's really a hidden gem. Everyone knows, the Dare to Lead book, but the deep dive that we really need, especially when it comes to how authenticity and courage are the real foundations of leadership, for me was found in The Power of Vulnerability. And it was actually a book that was suggested to me from my executive coach many, many years ago. And Tank, the first few times that I tried to read it, I had to stop. So there's like a certain number of guideposts throughout the book. I can't remember how many, we'll call it 8 or 10. And I would only make it to the first or second guidepost. And I was just so emotionally wrecked and
Mm.
lost in thought and a little dissociated, if I can be completely honest. I just couldn't continue on with the book. And so I would have to put it down. And that told me, Kristi, you have a lot of unhealed trauma that you really didn't even think was trauma. I
It's
wouldn't have
there.
ever
Yeah.
called it trauma. I think of trauma as like, oh, I was in a car wreck and I have trauma, right? Like an actual injury. And so that was very eye opening and powerful. So I would recommend anyone who's serious about knowing themselves better and then showing
Hmm.
up differently for themselves and for everyone else. The Power of Vulnerability by Brene Brown changed my life.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you highlighted a book that it may be kind of non-traditional when it comes to leadership, but hurt people hurt, right?
Hmm.
So if you're not clear on who you are, you're not clear on the things that you are experiencing and therefore projecting, you could impact your work environment in a negative way.
Yes.
So I really love that I haven't read that one yet. So I'll make sure that I pick it up. Maybe over the holiday season I can take a listen. But it sounds like it might be a book that I need to physically read and highlight and take notes. And so I may
Hmm.
want to pick it up, a physical copy. Um,
Yeah. It
awesome. Thank
definitely,
you
it
for
definitely was for me. And to be completely vulnerable, I was not a good leader before reading that book. I think I thought
sharing.
I was, but I was very much a hurt person hurting people, and projection was absolutely all over everything that I was saying and doing, in business and outside of business. And parenting is first and foremost a leadership role. And I didn't want the same outcome for my children that I had. And I didn't want them having to recover and work really hard to kind of close the gap in some pretty important areas of growth that I don't feel that I had when I grew up, really from an emotional growth standpoint. So, 100%, I owe probably everything to that book.
Wow, that's very and that's a huge recommendation for why it's important to read and then kind of take those learnings and across multiple areas of your life, both personal and professional. I've got
Yeah.
to get that one.
Yeah.
I gotta jump in and get that one.
So, how about you? Book number two?
Book number two is for me, Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. And in the book, Gladwell explores challenges of communicating with strangers, highlighting how our biases and assumptions can lead to your misinterpretation of how someone might perceive you, and any negative consequences that you might make up in your mind of why you shouldn't speak to people. And this is something that I am actively working on as I am moving myself through what a introvert might look like and what they might
Mhm.
do. So I'm kind of challenging some of those, that persona that I've taken on, because I honestly was
Okay.
not that way growing up as a child. So yeah,
This is fascinating. Okay, talking to strangers. Firstly,
yeah,
I
yeah,
want to read it because I think we all make up stories in our head based on experiences that we've had, right?
yep,
There's a reason those stories are there in the first place. Um,
right.
but I wonder, would this help our kids or is it too old for them? Is it too advanced?
Uh, no. So your kids are in high school. I think I would say like the high school age is probably it would this would be very, very helpful because it is going to challenge what you think is a norm challenge your biases and really push you to leaning into learning more about other people. He also emphasizes in the book the importance of understanding context, recognizing that people's behavior is influenced by their individual backgrounds and perspectives. So again, it's a
Mhm.
little bit of that, a little bit of the first book that I mentioned, The Four Agreements, kind of
Mhm.
mashed up with opening up your lens and learning more about your community. Um, I really like it because you get to the actionable steps there were like question your initial judgments, consider the context, practice active listening, right? So it's a
Mhm.
good opportunity for, folks to do that. We often do not practice
Yes.
active listening. We're waiting to respond. And then being aware of the default to truth and what that really means, because everybody is coming to a conversation with their own understanding of truth,
Mhm.
right? So taking in new insights and then reimagining, rebuilding what your truth is. Because then when I
Mhm.
know something different, my truth does shift. It's a phenomenal book. So yeah, I would recommend it for your high schoolers. My middle schooler, maybe not yet. Maybe when she's in eighth grade, maybe. And it really is going to be dependent on the child and the adult and where you are in your understanding of yourself, right? Because it is going to challenge you to challenge your biases.
Yeah. Well, I love anything, as you know, that has to do with that. So, what I'm thinking of, honestly, for me is if I read this book, um, then I can distill that down into bite-sized pieces, and that can be conversation topic at dinner or in car rides, and just
Hmm.
kind of like start dripping these, which is what I do a lot of the times. We have a feelings wheel in our car, and it just stays in the pocket, the seat pocket in our car, and we'll whip it out and be like, "Well, how does that make you feel?" And so I'm kind of thinking, well, this could be one of those also car
Yeah.
conversation topics, and just say, "Hey, I read this and learned this," because I know that anxiety runs rampant, especially in our younger generations. And so much of that,
Hmm.
I think people are so worried and concerned, with what everyone else is thinking about them. And
Hmm.
a lot of that is projection.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love that suggestion too. I may borrow that from you in terms of distilling it down into some bite-sized chunks that I can have some intentional conversations with London. And in recent weeks, recent days, she'd shared with me that she had to step away from class and she went to her wellness counselor. They have a wellness counselor. I
Mhm. I
love it.
love that.
I love
Yay.
it. And so she took some time away from class because she was feeling a lot of anxiety between swimming and she was rehearsing for our audition. So I love how you are thinking of ways to incorporate the books and the content that we're talking about today with our kids, and I may borrow that
Oh, I love
piece to
it.
distill down with London. Thank you for that
Well,
idea.
yeah, of course. Listen, everything that I ever learn, my children by default, unfortunately for them, half the time, they also have to learn. And, another book that I really started hammering into them concepts of is one of my second favorite books, which is actually called Conscious Leadership. And that's by
Mm,
a slew of authors, John Mackey, Steve McIntosh, and Carter Phipps. And basically, the conscious leadership book is for anyone who wants to lead with purpose and clarity. But I think that's really lame because who doesn't want to lead with purpose and clarity? But what I really liked about this book is it talks all about how leadership isn't just about hitting the numbers, it's really actually about aligning people, values, and actions. Heavy emphasis on actions to create
action.
something meaningful. And so I think one of the reasons that
Mm,
this book made the list for me, Tank, is I knew I was not in a good cultural fit for me or pretty much, well, according to the data, 34% of the other employees who worked at my last employer. I knew I was not in a good culture fit. As I listened to this book on my drive to and fro every day, and I just continued to think, not conscious leadership. Do not follow the I guess the construct of exactly what was being talked about in the book. And so much of that is actions aligning with words.
Mm-hmm.
I say it as empathy and execution can and should coexist, and all the data proves that. I hadn't gotten into the data yet because who has time? At that point in my life, I was just trying to survive. If I can be completely honest with our audience, I was just trying to survive. Take that for what you will. And so, as I would listen to this book, to and fro this environment that was anything but conscious and anything full of leaders, I thought, I'm one little lowly human. There's no way I can change 900 people. This is a cancerous, toxic workplace that I absolutely have to get out of for my own mental health and, frankly, to save my life.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say that conscious leadership saved my life, I mean it.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that for a few reasons. So you could see yourself in the book and also see things in the book that were not a reflection of your current reality, and then it therefore challenged you to like, wait a minute, look around, and this is not where I need to be. This is not none of this is a definition of conscious leadership.
Not
Um,
at all. And some of the learnings I would, naturally were very aligned with how I was as a leader and what I thought I was going into based on promotions and commercials and things, that were put out. But I would even, lead meetings in a way or ask questions in a way, how is this aligned with this? Or this is directly contradictory to, the data that's showing that people aren't happy with this, or this. And the responses, if it wasn't silence, it was, that's not the concern. We're planning for this. It was just a goalpost constantly moved and nothing ever focused on actual people that worked there. And it was interesting to me that when I started using the tactics that were presented in the book, because they talk about really applicable case studies, and I found some of them to be really similar to what I was facing in my own environment. And so I would send the email that was suggested, and I would do the things that were suggested, and I just kept being met with more and more hostility and more hatred, frankly. And I was just like, these people are going to lose their minds. All because of a conscious leader asking them, could your actions please align with your words? It was
Words.
just
Yeah.
wild. It was the wildest time of my life. I'm incredibly grateful, and I'm really grateful it's over.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that book. Um, my next book is a deviation from conscious leadership in the sense of like leading yourself and leading teams, but it is a bit of a bridge to customer service, right?
Mm,
So some of your conscious leadership pieces could and will ultimately impact customer service. Um, so the book is Unreasonable Hospitality, and
mhm.
it's by Will Guidiar. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, so I'm going to spell it. It's Guidara. Awesome book. He recounts the transformation of a um, Madison Park restaurant where he wanted to really focus in on customer experience and having unique experiences and how that could elevate not only the restaurant business, but the industry and therefore hospitality and therefore CX, right? So it starts with the restaurant industry, but you can take a lot of those pieces and weave it into anything that you're doing.
Yeah.
He wanted to have a focus on creating exceptional and personalized experiences, as I mentioned, for every single guest. This involved empowering his staff, fostering creativity, and then prioritizing what the guests wanted above and beyond.
Mhm,
So the actionable steps that I took from that book was just again focused on personalized experience,
mhm,
and how that can really create brand affinity for not only that restaurant, but for anywhere where you might spend your dollars, or even as a consultant, right? If
mhm,
you create those personalized experiences, people like, oh, I can go back to Tanqueray. She's going to make sure that this happens in this way, and I like that, right? The empower the team was another big takeaway. So making sure that they had what they need in order to deliver on those,
Mhm.
elevated experiences. And then anticipating needs. So training yourself, training your team to be able to anticipate what your customer needs and then being willing to pivot. And then value collaboration. So promote strong communication, collaboration between different parts of the business, parts of your team, and your organization to make sure that it's seamless and that exceptionalism comes through at every single juncture that your customers interacting with you. So I thoroughly enjoyed that book. It gave me a new lens on customer experience.
Yeah, that's fascinating that you mentioned that. I have an interesting lens on customer experience only because I started following somebody recently, and she owns, it's called the Black Hoteliers and Hospitality Association. And so I see when she comments or likes something, and it's from these hoteliers who do boutique and custom hotel experiences. And so now I'm getting to start to see through the lens of these very boutique hoteliers who absolutely are obsessed with the customer experience, right? And what that looks like,
Mhm.
and how important it is to anticipate a need, and how important it is to collaborate with every department of the hotel to make sure that this experience is absolutely like five diamond. I have been blown away by this. I had no idea all the intricacies and the communication that was required to make these stays super seamless. And this has nothing to do with anything that I do, except for the fact that I value leadership to the nth degree in every space. So I was interested in learning, how did they become so good at it? But then also, I just
Mhm.
love to travel and I'm kind of bougie. So that's how I became interested in this. And I'm just so curious. Now that makes me want to read this book because I'm like, I wonder if this is some big, really great book, maybe in their industry and something that they're super, involved and know a lot about.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think it's a yes and. I think it's, I believe everyone could take from the book something that could resonate within whatever industry you're in, whether it's energy or healthcare or manufacturing or, name it. Because if you're trying to delight your customer, um,
Mhm.
pieces of the book will resonate with you and you can, leverage some of the lessons, really hard lessons. He has a lot of case studies, a lot of stories that he's woven through the book, and you can take those things and absolutely apply it to where you currently are.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I'm definitely going to check
Awesome.
that out. Okay,
Mm.
so for my third book, y'all knew we weren't getting out of here without talking about my book. And I'm going to show the cover of this thing because I want to shout out to my little cover designer, Jason
Yeah.
Arias. Listen, Unicorn Leader, it was his idea to have a little horn for the eye in unicorn. And I have to tell everybody that because I just think it's so cool. And so reason why I want to shout out that book, aside from the fact that it feels very awkward to shout out my own book, but I'm going to push through that because
Mhm.
honestly, when we think about leadership books that challenge us to lead with emotional intelligence, I would be remiss in not mentioning that because writing the book itself was very eye opening alongside of obviously four amazing co authors. It's just been really humbling to see how leaders use this framework to transform their teams. And to be really honest, Tank, I think that's been the thing that has been most shocking is just seeing what all of us put down on paper, which really was informed by lived experiences. And considering
Mhm.
that I worked alongside three of these contributing authors, two of which I was their supervisor at one point, one of which was an executive coach to me while I worked in the organization. And then, of course, another author who has been my executive coach externally for 7 years. It was just a full circle moment. And for us to be able to share that leadership is truly about compassionate communication and creating a sense of belonging.
Mhm.
And creating a sense of belonging starts with valuing the differences that every person brings to an organization. And so, what I hope to accomplish in that book and what people have told me has been accomplished, and honestly, when I read it, I feel it accomplished it, is actionable ideas that you can
Yeah.
take and implement yourself. You don't need the approval of a board of directors to do most of what's in that book. You don't need the approval of a CEO who may or may not be a compassionate unicorn leader. You can
Right.
start with yourself. You can start exactly where you are. You can start with your church group. You can start with your children and
Mm.
start implementing something and creating your own little movement. And I'm really, really proud of it.
Yeah, and you should be. You should be. Thank you so much for highlighting your book and taking some time to, dive a bit deeper into the framework and sharing that with our audience. I would strongly encourage all of our leaders to pick up Kristi's book, to pick up the books that we've mentioned. I do see some connection between your book and other books that you have mentioned and books that I've mentioned on today's podcast. And it all distills down to, improving your leadership style so you're able to, lead yourself, lead your team, lead your family, like lead in a multiple spaces, right? So I love it. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing your book. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. I mean, as we reflect on this podcast, we've all learned leadership lessons in unexpected places, whether it was a book or a podcast or blogs or movies or even pop culture, right? It's proof
Yep.
that inspiration for leadership is everywhere if you're paying attention. So,
Yes.
I kind of want to go into like a little bit of a lightning round, right? Which we've never really done here. So let's talk
Let's
about a
see how this
podcast.
goes.
Yeah, no kidding. Let's talk about a podcast other than ours because they're already listening. Do you have a podcast that you just absolutely love, Tank, that you don't miss and that you make sure that you listen to as soon as you can?
Yes, absolutely. So I listen, it's at least daily because I go back to old episodes of the Mel Robbins podcast.
Yes.
She is just so direct and also soft and caring and firm and just practical, grounded person. I feel like every time I get a message from Mel Robbins, and Mel, if you're listening, I love you too. Um, Her message always ends with, I love you. And I know she means that from the heart. She's such an inspiring, her whole backstory, just kind of leaving it all, losing it all, and starting over again is just so um, inspiring. And it lights my fire every time she opens her mouth. So, Mel Robbins podcast, it's my fuel on most weeks.
Yes. Okay, I love that. I've never listened
How
to
about
it. So
you?
Mel, if you're
You
listening,
gotta check it out.
we would love to have you on our podcast, Mel. You have an open invitation, and I will be sure to check your podcast out. We can do a swap. Girl, give us a call.
Yes.
Okay. Shannon Sharp. Listen, that's the podcast I listen to. I'm going to tell y'all something now. This is Kristi and Tanqueray on the rocks. It is 9:41 a.m. I am having a cocktail. This
Yes.
is not fake.
Mm.
Mm. So let me take a drink and let me tell y'all this. Shannon Sharp. My husband, while I was in Guatemala in February on a solo trip, which was amazing. In case anyone wants to go on a solo trip, go to Guatemala, Lake Atitlan. It's amazing. You will be changed forever. Said, Kristi, you absolutely have to watch Monique's episode on Shannon Sharp. It is screaming your name, girl. And I was like,
Mm.
on my solo trip, why are you texting me if the kids aren't dead? And two, okay.
Who
So,
said? Because
yeah, right.
I should not be getting a text. No.
Bless him. But he was so right. So I took an evening, after the Kansas City Chiefs won the Super Bowl. Not that I need to mention that I did see that while I was in Guatemala also. Whoop. But anyway, after that, I did watch the Monique episode on Shannon Sharp, and I have been addicted. First of all, I really resonated with her because I think people feel similarly about me sometimes. Who is this big girl out
Mm.
there in front of everybody like she needs and should be seen in all the light? Oh, well, in case y'all didn't know, my necklace does say shine. And that's a
Mhm.
little unicorn. Kendra Scott doing that thing with the unicorn necklace here underneath. It has a horn on it and everything. Listen, I felt for this woman. I felt like this woman many, many times in my journey
Wow.
to leadership. People wanted me in the vein that they wanted me until it was like, nope, 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 scoot over there. Nope, nope, nope. Now you're too much. No, no, now, hey, big girl. Hey, big girl. No, you can be big, but you can't be that big. Uh, so much of
Mm.
what she said resonated. And the other reason I love Shannon Sharp is this dude just says it how it is. And then
He really
also,
does.
he really does. And he's normal. Like he has the most wild things happen. But they're also really real things. And he just owns
Yeah.
it and is like, hey, guess what?
Yep.
Yes, this happened. Hey, guess what? Well, that was unfortunate. But yep, it happened. And then he
Yep.
addresses it. He's professional about it and he keeps it
Yeah.
moving. And I
Yep.
love
Yep.
that.
I love his show. I guess the most watched was the Cat Williams interview, but I have seen others where he had Kiki Palmer on. She talked about her background, and he doesn't say a lot to
Mhm.
get people to just open up. Like people tell them everything, and it's not in a gossipy, bitey, busy, nasty way. It's really like to inform, to encourage, because you do get so much encouragement from each of his guests that he has on. He just has a way of facilitating that conversation so people just sit down and open up. And then of course the bourbon doesn't help either. So I have gotten that Shea Lachey bourbon for my husband. So Shannon Sharp, you also have an open invitation to the Kristi and Tanqueray on the Rocks podcast.
Yes.
Just hit us
And
up.
that's right. On the rocks. And when we were thinking about starting a podcast, Tank, remember when I was like, hey, can we have drinks? Shannon Sharp got drinks. Can we have drinks?
Yeah. Yes, we can. We can. We can.
Mm.
Yes, we can have drinks.
Yes, we can,
Um,
girl. So yes,
awesome.
Shannon Sharp.
I love it. Love it. Thank you for bringing that one up. That's podcast that everyone should get into, definitely for different reasons because he has different unique guests week over week. Um, So I know the last thing we wanted to wrap on, Christy. So we talked about the books that have influenced our leadership style. We talked about podcasts that have influenced the ways in which we lead, either individually or professionally. We wanted to have a bit of more of rapid fire on um, beyond podcast books. Like, are there any TV shows that or quotes that have inspired you and kind of kept you going? Um, any of those, like, resonate with you, quotes or TV shows or both?
Oh yeah, for sure. So as far as quotes are concerned, everybody knows the Maya Angelou quote. I will repeat it until the day I die. And probably, I think I even told people it should be somewhere on my casket or on my ashes or whatever y'all decide to do with me. People will not remember what you said or did, but they absolutely will remember how you made them feel. Definitely that. And then the other one is a Brene Brown quote: clear is kind and unclear is unkind, which is very closely
Mm,
tied to your four agreements. Be clear.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. For me, it is "One monkey does not stop a show." And that is a quote from my father, Sergeant Major David Paul Richardson. He would say that to us every single opportunity he could, because oftentimes we get caught up in this groupthink thing, or if so and so's not doing it, then I can't do it, or if so and so, doesn't enjoy it, then I shouldn't enjoy it. And he was like, one monkey does not stop a show. Like the circus is going to continue. You just need to plug
Mhm.
in a different animal, or you need to be ready to move on your own. And so that is something that resonates. And when I say it to my kids, they're like, oh God, here we go. But I mean, it's short, simple. One monkey
Okay, but
doesn't stop a show.
a story for our listeners, because the first time Tank and I ever recorded in the same studio, it was a little bit of a shit show. Nothing worked. And then I'm dumb, so I don't know a damn thing about plugging things in and making things work. I'm like, Tank, there's all these buttons. And she's like, it's a remote. There's going to be buttons. I cannot even believe you just said that. So nothing was working. And you said, well, Kristi, one monkey doesn't stop a show. So blah, blah, blah. And I was like,
Yeah.
whatever I was supposed to do, I was going to do it. And so I love knowing that this quote came from your dad.
Yeah, 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 you just keep going. You gotta keep going, gotta keep pushing, and that's what we do as leaders, like, we find a different way to pivot, so
I
I
love
love
it.
it.
That is amazing. Okay, okay. So how about this one? Another rapid fire question. What's a book, and it can be one that you've already mentioned, but what's a book that everybody should read twice? Like, what is one that, listen, you're not going to get it all the first time?
Know Your Value by Mika Brzezinski. I've
Okay.
listened to it, and I've read it a couple of times, and it's not just about the negotiating the salary, like, it goes deeper, and sometimes we have to remind ourselves, like, who we are and what we bring to different jobs, to our family, to our friendships. And so I would strongly, strongly recommend reading this more than once because every single time you read it, it's going to hit different every single time. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And isn't it interesting how when we read something over, because mine would be The Power of Vulnerability by Brene Brown. When we
Mhm.
read something over and we're at a different place in our lives, we catch different
Yeah.
messages or we hear things differently.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. You hear it
So,
differently and you're like, oh, okay. I didn't, because you didn't need that message in that moment, but now you need it. So you're open to receive the message.
I I totally agree. So, a leadership lesson you learned the hard way. I will start this one because I want to give you a time to think. A leadership lesson you learned the hard way. Here's one that I learned the really hard way. Don't expect people to treat you and do for you in the same way you've treated and done for them.
Mm,
Don't
yeah.
expect people to show up for you in the same way that you've shown up for them. And transparently, I used to get really offended by it. I still do. I just have to have a conversation with myself because it kind of tracks back to what you said earlier. Don't take it personally. I used to take it really personally. Like, what the hell is wrong with this person? They can see that I'm leading with trust. They can see that I'm giving them all these opportunities. They can see that I'm being open and communicative. They can see that I operate from a collaborative mindset. Like, all of my actions are aligning with words. What the hell is wrong with this person? But now I just recognize that we're not aligned.
Mm,
I feel my feelings about it. And then I say, they're not capable.
mm, or
They're
that
either
one.
by
Yeah.
choice,
Either way. Yeah.
by choice, or by just sheer, they're not wired that way, or they're not aware, their consciousness isn't expanded yet to this degree. They're simply not capable to operate in the same way you're operating, level up, and then they got to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one, because you get so disappointed, you just expect I expect, I'm gonna use my I statements, I expect to be treated the way I'm treating others, and so if you're pouring in and you're giving, you're just like, "Well, damn," "A little reciprocity, please, player,
Yes.
can I get" But
Yes.
it doesn't always work that way, and oddly enough, like yeah, it just doesn't work that way. And it for me, what I was gonna say, and I won't censor myself because this is my podcast and your
Woo!
podcast where I'm just gonna say the thing. Um, I used to take a lot of that for a long period of time and just make the excuses. And then, another Maya Angelou quote, when people reveal themselves to you, believe it.
Mhm.
And
The
so I've
first
had
time.
to really the first time, you ain't got to go through the multiple iterations. It's the same thing, it's just a different flavor. So move on, Tanqueray, move on. And it's okay.
It
It's
is
okay.
okay. And it's hard because, we never wanna, well, again, I'll use my I statement. I never wanna cut people off. right? I don't want to,
Yeah.
I'm such a fixer by nature. And I love bringing people along and I love elevating and I love all the things. But I also have to recognize when energy just isn't being reciprocated.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
I would have listened to my own advice, I would have exited corporate America 5 years ago. This is my fault. Like, it's my fault that it took as long as it did for me to build this empire. It's my fault.
Mhm.
I knew 5 years ago when I lived in Kansas City that corporate America wasn't ready to act right. I knew I had a book in me. I knew I had ideas in me. I knew I had an empire to build, and I was scared,
Mhm. Yeah.
but I knew.
Yep. Well, timing is everything. Timing is everything. Absolutely. So as I'm thinking, it gave me time to think about my hardest lesson, leadership lesson, and it has been around sharing my voice with the world. Um, I am an introvert and I enjoy the quietness. I enjoy the thinking time because I love to think. I love to analyze things. I recharge in that way. And I need to, and I have started vocalizing a lot more of what's happening in my brain
Mhm.
to the outside world, and also offering a very unique perspective to different ideas, my knowledge, my experiences, my passions, my cultural references, like all the things I'm just going to give it to you all, right? And that's been my biggest um, leadership lesson is because when I was holding myself back, my team would also do the same thing. A lot of times people will mimic your behaviors. So I would hold things back or seem a little stoic or guarded. And I had someone tell me one time that I was stoic, and I was like, "Hmm, I thought I was being polished and professional," but no, they just couldn't get enough from me, and they wanted more from me. So that's been my biggest leadership lesson is really just being a lot more open to sharing who I am, and all of who I am, and not just bits and pieces. So that's been my biggest leadership lesson.
And that's beautiful because you were able to connect the dots between you giving yourself the freedom to really share, created a sense of belonging for everybody on your team.
I hadn't thought about it that way. I hadn't thought about it that way. Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that insight. I just thought like the world needs more of me. The
Mhm.
world needs more of each of us. And so I have to do my part in sharing my perspective with others, just as others need to do the same, sharing their perspective, sharing their lessons. And collectively, that's what makes the experiences in community, in leadership, in organizations better.
100%. I mean, it's just another form of diversity, right? I mean, really, that's what it is because the thoughts that you keep to yourself and the ideas and all the thinking time and the wonderful creative, you know, I guess, plans and wonderful little game plans and blueprints that I'm sure that you have kind of going on in your brain. I just think, how much have we missed out on throughout your career because you just didn't feel safe to share?
Yeah. 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 Yeah, it's safety is a piece of it, but then it's also like, some ownership on me, like just share more. It's okay to share more of what you're thinking, and some ideas are going to land well and some might not. And either way, it's okay. No one's going to die. No one's going to die.
That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Listen, this has
Awesome.
been fantastic. And I tell you what, from everything that we've shared today, last question, is there a TV show? I actually don't really have a TV show, so I'm going to punt
I
this
don't
one to you.
either.
I
Yeah,
don't either.
I don't have a TV show. The most recent thing that I um went to watch with the girls was Moana 2, and there were
Mhm.
several moments within that movie that really were impactful from a woman, a girl's perspective. She didn't wait on some prince to go and do and save her. Like, she built the ship, charted the ocean, you know, going to find more people, new spaces to explore, and that was just so encouraging.
Mhm.
Her grandmother had a lot of moments in the movie where she showed up in spirit and encouraged her. Um, that movie was just, and so my little ones noticed immediately, like, there's no prince, she's not really a princess. Like, Moana is just heroic. It's my
Yeah.
5-year-old. She's just heroic. She's a whole thing herself. She doesn't need all of that. So that would probably be the movie I would mention that's been really impactful in recent weeks for our family and for myself.
Listen, everybody go watch Moana. We haven't done that yet, but we loved Moana number one. Yeah,
Mhm.
listen, we'll end it on that because I think that's fantastic.
Yep, yep, absolutely, absolutely. So, here's the thing: leadership lessons are everywhere. They're in books, they're in blogs, they're in podcasts, movies, and yes, even your own work, Christy. Today's episode reminded me how often we overlook the impact of our own contributions. And so now we are challenging you this week to think about what's the one leadership lesson that you've learned and where did it come from, right? Did you learn it from a book, podcast, those unintentional mentors, or folks that are around us and saying those really, really deep, meaningful things, and we don't get it until like maybe a year or so later, or maybe we get it in the moment. But we want you to tag us on social,
Mhm.
letting us know, like, what were those leadership lessons. We'd love to hear from you. Um, Again, this is another great episode of Kristi and Tanqueray on the Rocks. And until next time, keep leading with your heart and remember, inspiration is everywhere. Cheers.
Cheers.